Thanks so much for being here. Friends, today we want to talk about the housing crisis and how that is a crisis that is really across the country a top concern. People tell me all the time how they're being forced to leave their communities because they can't afford a place to rent even. And for a lot of young families, a lot of young professionals, a lot of people, buying a home just seems completely out of reach. Something they can't even imagine ever being able to afford to do. And I feel like that's a problem. It's a problem when people can't live in their communities, they can't stay where their friends and their family and their jobs are, and they're being forced to leave. It is heartbreaking when people want to stay somewhere where they've got all their roots, they've got all their connections, and they can't afford to stay. And we know a part of the big problem of why that's happening is because there's big money in real estate. And people are competing, first-time homebuyers are competing with large corporations with deep pockets that are trying to snap up property to make profits off them. They're using our housing market like a stock market. And that's something we've got to stop. And secondly, we've got to build more homes. We've got to build and renovate and retrofit. Our plan is altogether 1.7 million homes that will be built and renovated and retrofitted, homes that we can find that are in our budget, that are affordable. This is purpose-built rental, this is cooperative, not-for-profit housing, and homes that people can buy that they can actually afford to, that's in their budget. That's our plan. We want to take this on. We know that the big money that we've seen in housing, a lot like Mr. Trudeau's candidate in this riding of Granville, is someone that's alleged to have flipped over 42 times, flipping properties to make money. And then the Erin O'Toole's candidate is someone who defended speculators in court. So allegedly. So we've got on both sides the people that are making things worse, the people that are using this housing market as a stock market, and then the people that are defending those that are speculating. Both are on Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau's team. We are different. Our candidate, Anjali, is someone who's committed to making sure people can find a home that's in their budget. We're committed to fighting for you. This has gone on for so long. Since the time Mr. Trudeau took office in 2015, the average national cost of a home from 2015 to present has gone up by $300,000. Well, here in Vancouver, it's doubled. That is astronomical in terms of the rising costs, and it is something that people can't keep up with. Wages haven't gone up. People don't have the means to do that. We are going to change this. We're going to fight hard to make sure you can afford your home and you can afford a place to call home. That's our commitment to you. Donc, ce qu'on veut parler aujourd'hui, c'est le fait qu'on a une crise du logement. Une crise du logement qui frappe fort à travers le pays. Et la réalité, c'est qu'on a des gens qui ne peuvent pas trouver un logement dans leur budget, donc ils ont besoin de quitter leur communauté. Ils doivent quitter les communautés où ils ont des connexions, des familles, des amis et leur travail. Et ça me rend triste, la réalité que les gens ne peuvent pas trouver quelque chose dans leur budget. Et l'importance d'avoir une maison, un logement, c'est essentiel. Donc, on va souligner deux enjeux, deux problèmes avec la crise du logement. Premièrement, on a des riches investisseurs qui jouent avec notre marché comme c'est pour seulement gagner des profits. Et deuxièmement, on doit investir pour bâtir plus de logements abordables et sociaux. On doit s'assurer que tout le monde peut trouver un logement dans le budget. Ça, c'est notre but. Donc, le choix dans cette élection, vous avez un choix entre Justin Trudeau, qui laisse les riches investisseurs d'exploiter le système, ou vous pouvez voter pour l'NPD, qui vont s'assurer que vous avez une maison dans votre budget et qui vont toujours se battre pour vous. So you've got a choice in this election. Can you afford another 4 years of Mr. Trudeau, who's let the housing crisis get so bad? Or will you vote for New Democrats who are going to fight for you to make sure you can find a home that's in your budget? And with that, thank you so much for being here. I'm ready for any questions you might have. Merci, je suis prêt pour vos questions.
First question, Menaka Raman-Wilms from the Globe and Mail.
Hello, Mr. Singh. I'm going to start off with a different topic.
Sure.
The Globe today published an excerpt from Jody Wilson-Raybould's book describing the meeting she had with Justin Trudeau when she said he wanted her to lie about the SNC-Lavalin issue. What's your response to these revelations from her book?
They're shocking, not surprising, because this is what Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould has been saying for a long time, and now she's laying out those details. And she's laid them out with incredible detail. And as always, we've always believed what Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould has had to say. And we believe that that's another example of this pattern of behavior that we're seeing from Mr. Trudeau, of not being kicking out strong women in his cabinet, whether it was his previous justice minister or whether it was the previous Ms. Philpott, Minister Philpott. We've seen this as a trend, and it's troubling.
And going to housing affordability now, lots of people, especially young people, may not even be thinking about buying a house yet, but they're probably renting. They might be renting for several years. Can you speak to what's in your plan to help renters and what's there to help them eventually transition to hopefully buying their own place?
Thank you, certainly. We know that a lot of people are renting, and like I said earlier, and like you mentioned, lots of people, it's not even in their imagination that they could ever own a home. So they're just looking to find a place that they can afford to rent. And that's becoming harder and harder. And it still applies that a lot of people are being forced to leave their communities because they can't afford a place they can even rent. So they've got to go somewhere else, and they leave their friends and family and their connections behind. And that's a difficult and horrible thing to have to do. So what we're proposing is we looked at the average cost of rent since Mr. Trudeau took office in 2015, and the average cost of rent per year has gone up on average over $4,000, $4,200. So we're proposing a rental subsidy to help offset that increase by putting up to $5,000 rental subsidy for families. And that subsidy is a short-term fix. We know that that's not going to fix the root causes of the problem, but people need help now. They need some immediate relief. People are struggling, and it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet when your paycheck, so much of it goes towards just paying your rent. There's not much money left over to pay the rest of the bills. So this will be support that'll help people in the short term, in the immediate term. And then our goal is to build more purpose-built rental, to incentivize that, to encourage the building of homes that are within people's budget to rent, and to support cooperatives and not-for-profits. We can deal with this problem. We can fix it. We've seen other countries do it. It just requires the courage to take it on, and that's what we have.
Next question, David Thurton from
Yeah.
CBC News.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Singh. Good to see you, and thanks to the people in the neighborhood for having us. Beautiful neighborhood.
Beautiful, eh?
I wanted to ask you about the details in your platform once again. You're presenting a graph where the XY axis has no numbers. It's literally become a meme on social media for the lack of details that your campaign has been unable to share with Canadians. And a lot of your plans are quite ambitious, more ambitious than the Liberals, such as maybe even your housing plan here today. So, I guess, how can Canadians take the NDP seriously? How can they, trust your party as being ready to govern if you don't have details, if the details are missing from your campaign?
We've got lots of clear evidence. We've shared with folks the cost of housing, how it's gone up in the time since Mr. Trudeau has been in office, how the average cost has gone up nationally by $300,000 to buy your first home, how the cost here in Vancouver has doubled since since Mr. Trudeau's come into office, how the rental prices for families, the average rental prices have gone up by $4,200 since the time Mr. Trudeau took office. It is very clear when you speak to people. When you ask them, have things gotten better in the past 6 years of Mr. Trudeau being in office? They'll say no. They've in fact gotten worse. While Mr. Trudeau has been in office, things have gotten worse. How can people trust somebody or have any confidence in somebody who's had 6 years to fix a problem and has made it actually worse, that somehow is going to fix a problem now? When you've got 6 years to fix something, you don't fix it, it's pretty tough to say, hey, hire me again. Doesn't make a lot of sense. What we're saying to people is we're going to take a different approach. One of the key problems that we're highlighting, whether it's with the climate crisis, whether it's with a rigged economy, and whether it's with housing, is we're saying really clearly the billionaires are making out like bandits. And whether that's in the housing market or the biggest polluters or in the economy, those at the very top continue to exploit the system, and Liberals and Conservatives have let them do it. Our offer to Canadians, what makes us really different is we're going to take them on directly. We're the only party that said we're going to tax the billionaires. We're going to take on the super wealthy, and we're going to make sure companies like Amazon start paying their fair share. Every other party has voted against that. Trudeau voted against it. O'Toole voted against that. So they are not going to fix the problems when we know what the heart of the problems lie in a system that's being exploited by the super wealthy.
But how could Canadians trust you to take a different approach, Mr. Singh, if the details are not there or you're releasing them so late in the campaign?
We've said for a long time, and people know where we stood for a long time, that our approach is going to be different. We're not going to let the super rich have a free ride. We're not going to let our housing market be used like a stock market. We've called for getting big money out of the housing market for a long time, and Mr. Trudeau doesn't have the courage to do that. And we've got the evidence he hasn't done it. And we certainly know that Mr. O'Toole won't do it either. We've showed folks again and again we are willing to stand up to big pharmaceuticals. We said for big pharmaceuticals, we're going to make sure we bring in a universal pharmacare for all. And certainly the big pharmaceutical companies don't like that. Probably why Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole teamed up to vote against it. But we're not afraid of it. We want to fight for people. And we've shown that with the consistency. People have seen us every day point to people and say, we're going to fight for you, we're going to stand up for you, and we're going to take on the super wealthy, the ultra rich, the billionaires, the 44 wealthiest Canadians, the billionaires that increased their wealth by 78 billion. We've made it clear whose side we're on and who we're going to fight for. Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau haven't. And that's what people can trust in.
Prochaine question, Jean-Sébastien Cloutier de Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Singh. Justin Trudeau, ce matin, vient pour la première fois de faire vraiment un appel au vote progressiste. On va sûrement l'entendre plusieurs fois, cette expression-là, d'ici les élections. Il dit que le NPD et les Verts sont cyniques lorsqu'ils disent que les libéraux n'ont rien fait pour le climat. Et il dit qu'il est le seul qui peut prendre le pouvoir pour faire avancer les objectifs progressistes. Qu'est-ce que vous lui répondez?
J'ai hâte de répondre à cette question. Directement aux progressistes. Est-ce que c'est progressiste d'avoir une cible et de le manquer chaque année? Est-ce que c'est progressiste de dire on va éliminer les subventions aux pétrolières et au lieu de les éliminer, de les augmenter jusqu'à 900 millions de dollars? Est-ce que c'est progressiste de dire on va mettre un prix sur la pollution, mais on va exempter les grands pollueurs? Le problème avec les propos de M. Trudeau, c'est que les gens sachent ce qu'il a déjà fait. On a le bilan de 600. Et si quelqu'un ne règle pas un problème pour 600, comment on peut avoir confiance qu'il va y avoir quelque chose de différent dans les prochaines 4 ans? Donc, on a aussi vu, si vous avez besoin de quelqu'un qui se bat pour vous, pendant cette pandémie, à chaque fois que M. Trudeau a voulu faire le minimum, 10% subvention salariale, 1 000 $ pour la PCU, c'était nous qui a forcé le gouvernement de l'augmenter. On a doublé la PCU, on a augmenté la subvention salariale et on a aussi mis en œuvre un congé de maladie payé, un programme qu'on a dit 22 fois qu'on doit accroître et M. Trudeau a dit non 22 fois pour un programme qu'on sait va sauver les vies. Et on a la preuve. Pour le climat, ce n'est pas M. Trudeau. L'NPD a toujours montré qu'on a l'option pour défendre l'environnement et défendre les travailleurs. C'est nous. Ce n'est pas M. Trudeau. Pas du tout.
In English, please.
The thing is, Mr. Trudeau can say what he wants, and I want to say directly to progressives, is it progressive to promise to reduce emissions and miss every single target? Is it progressive to say, as Mr. Trudeau claims, that we're going to end fossil fuel subsidies and then he turns around and increases them by $900 million a year. In fact, more subsidies to the fossil fuel sector than even Mr. Harper. Is it progressive to say, I'm going to put a price on pollution, but then exempt the biggest polluters? Mr. Trudeau is not someone you can trust on the environment because we've got 6 years of evidence to look at. In the past 6 years, he has shown really clearly he is not going to fight this climate crisis. He doesn't want to, or wants to talk about it and not actually do it. Maybe he doesn't want to do it so he can campaign on it every time and then still not do it. People have the evidence in front of them. He's not going to fight this climate crisis because he hasn't in the past 6 years. So how can people trust him now? We've said all along, we are the ones you can trust when it comes to fighting the climate crisis and making sure we protect workers. We are a workers' party, we're a party of healthcare, and we are a party for the environment, and you can trust us on all these things.
En sous-question, libéraux, conservateurs sont en Ontario aujourd'hui. Vous allez en Ontario dans les prochains jours. La bataille de l'Ontario va être très importante. Et là-dessus, il y a une autre attaque libérale sur vous ce matin. On dit que vous mettez sur le même pied libéraux et conservateurs dans la crise du climat. Et ça favorise les conservateurs. Est-ce que vous êtes prêt à admettre que les conservateurs ont un plan plus inquiétant pour le climat que les libéraux, par exemple?
Ça, c'est aussi une autre bonne question. Parce que c'est quoi la différence entre quelqu'un qui dit « Oh oui, on a un grand problème, c'est sérieux, c'est un sérieux problème », mais qui effectivement fait rien, ou quelqu'un qui dit « Oh, je ne crois pas qu'il y a un problème » et aussi fait rien. Effectivement, les deux vont faire rien parce qu'on a la preuve. Donc, je suis d'accord que M. O'Toole n'a pas un plan pour faire face à la crise climatique. Et effectivement, on n'est pas confiant qu'il vraiment comprenne comment c'est sérieux cette crise. Mais peut-être que M. Trudeau a utilisé les mots, a dit oui, on a une crise, mais ses actions ne sont pas les actions qui rassemblent à quelqu'un qui vraiment croit qu'il y a un problème, parce qu'il n'a pas répondu au problème. Donc, c'est vrai, les deux, effectivement, vont faire les mêmes choses. Un va donner des belles paroles, l'autre pas des belles paroles, mais les résultats sont les mêmes. On a une 600 de bilan de M. Trudeau où il a manqué chaque cible, augmenté les émissions, la pire bilan du G7, et on a M. O'Toole qui va faire probablement la même chose. Donc ça, c'est pourquoi je dis clairement, si vous voulez faire face à la crise climatique, votez NPD. Si vous voulez avoir une assurance médicament universelle, la meilleure façon, c'est de voter NPD. Si vous vraiment voulez réaliser une garderie, un système de garderie qui est accessible et universel, votez NPD. Parce qu'on est le seul parti avec la confiance, avec nos valeurs, qui dit clairement on va continuer de pousser pour ça.
In English, please.
Yes. It's an interesting question, and I think a really important question to talk about. I agree that Mr. O'Toole doesn't really seem like someone who particularly cares about the environment or considers it a serious problem. And that's fair to say, and people have raised a lot of concerns about it. But what's the difference to you in your lives, or more importantly, to the planet? What is the difference between someone who doesn't really believe there's a crisis and someone who doesn't act like there's a crisis? At the end of the day, you're going to get the same results. We got Mr. Trudeau who said it's a big deal, for sure. He said great words on this. But we've got 6 years of his track record, and it's pretty horrible. Not just me saying it, it's the worst in all of G7 nations. So he's got the worst record of the G7 nations. He's missed every single target. He promises to do one thing and does the opposite. Like he literally promised to end fossil fuel subsidies, then increases them, and he's got the higher fossil fuel subsidies than the Conservative government. So how is it going to really make a difference if you vote for somebody who says a lot of great things and doesn't do it, or someone who doesn't really believe in the problem in the first place? You're not really going to get much different. So that's why I'm saying to Canadians, this is serious. If you want results, vote New Democrat. We are committed to fighting the climate crisis. We are committed to investing in healthcare. We are committed to childcare. For us, it's not a game. It's not about saying these things for show. This is serious. We understand how serious it is. So if you want it done, vote for us and we'll make it happen.
Next question, Althea Raj with the Toronto Star.
Hi, I'm going to build
Hello.
on my Radio-Canada's colleague's question because I too was struck by Mr. Trudeau's statements this morning. He said the same thing at the Star editorial board yesterday, accusing you of creating cynicism by saying that the Liberals had done nothing on the environment, and basically saying that a Trudeau government and an O'Toole government would be the same thing. You've just given us your answer to that question. His rebuttal is that they haven't done nothing. They put a price on carbon. That was a really big thing. They convinced conservative-leaning premiers to go along with their plan, and that if Stephen Harper had won in 2015, that wouldn't happen. If Andrew Scheer's government had won in 2019, that wouldn't have happened. Do you really think there is absolutely no difference between a Justin Trudeau government and an Erin O'Toole government when it comes to the environment?
You know what? I'll take a different approach on it. I think it's a really fair question because I think this is really important for people to know. What he has done is still the worst in the G7 nation, in G7 nations. So I mean, every other G7 nation has done better. What he's done has still increased emissions every year. He's missed targets every year. What he's done is for sure put a price on pollution, but what's the point of the price on pollution if the biggest emitters aren't even included? So really, if people want to tackle this crisis, it's not going to come from these little small steps that really don't get us anywhere. If people want to tackle the climate crisis, I'm saying we shouldn't be stuck between a battle between bad and worse, because that's what it sounds like to me, right? We got, sure, Mr. O'Toole is worse, but Mr. Trudeau is pretty bad. And at the end of the day, and people end up paying the price. And if they both are not committed to fighting this thing with everything they have, how does that make a difference for us? You don't have to be stuck with this same kind of formulation where you got one person who continues to miss his targets, says one thing, does another thing, doesn't get things done for people, and then say, oh, you know what, at least it's a little bit better than someone who's even worse. Like, that's a pretty weak way to deal with the problem that we're up against. We're saying we can do a lot better. We don't have to be stuck with someone who misses their targets, who says a lot of great things, but then fails to deliver on it. We could do a lot better. Other countries that are in the same category as us have done better. Why should we limit our optimism? Why should we limit our goals to someone who's failed again and again? I'm saying to Canadians, you don't have to be stuck with this argument. Someone's selling you something pretty bad and saying, but it might be a bit better than someone else. That's not what we need to deal with this climate crisis. We got some beautiful young kids behind us. These kids deserve better than that. I don't want to look at these kids in the eye and say, you know what, at least this person wasn't as bad. That's not going to fight the climate crisis. That's not going to prevent the forest fires. That's not going to stop a community like Lytton that gets wiped out. That's not good enough. I don't think that's good enough, and I don't think Canadians think that's good enough. If you fail Canadians for 6 years, you don't deserve to get the job again. That's what's up.
So I take it from your answer that you think the two are the same. I'm going to bring you back to like a decade ago, when the NDP sided with the Conservatives to defeat Paul Martin. A lot of New Democrats and progressive voters felt like there was a bit of guilt for ushering in a decade of Stephen Harper. Will you feel a little bit of guilt if Erin O'Toole becomes Prime Minister on September 20th?
You know, really good question. And I've been asked this question a lot of times about, propping up the Conservatives and how I feel about that. Amongst the 5 leaders right now running in this election, of the 5 leaders that are in this current election right now, there is only one leader who has ever propped up a Conservative, and that's Justin Trudeau. So it's not really a hypothetical. The only leader right now running in this race who has propped up a Conservative is Justin Trudeau. In 2009, when he was a member of Parliament, he propped up the Harper Conservatives. He voted to keep them going. He voted for a budget that brought in $60 billion of corporate tax cuts that he maintained once he was a prime minister. So let's put the hypotheticals aside. The only leader that's running in this election that has propped up Conservatives is Mr. Trudeau.
Hi there. Next question, Annie Bertrand-Oliver from CTV News.
Hello, Mr. Singh. A group of BC municipalities today is calling on more funding from the province and the federal government in order to tackle the housing crisis. In your plan, do you intend to provide any funding to provinces that is specifically tied to the build of new houses? And also, how do you intend to get big corporations, big builders, who are often looking for profit, to actually spend the money on affordable housing?
Yeah, this cuts to the heart of what we're up against, and this is really important for us to respond to. First off, we want to work with provinces and territories, and so we want to provide the funding so that we're playing a real role in tackling the housing crisis. We know that back in the 90s, the federal government was investing significantly in building affordable housing, was a significant part of that solution, and for a number of decades that hasn't happened. And a part of the reason why we're in this crisis is because the federal government has failed to do its part to partner with municipalities and provinces. So we want to reverse that trend. We want to work actively with provinces and territories and municipalities directly and really aggressively invest in building homes that people can afford. It's got to be a part of the solution. And then to get big money out, a couple of things we want to do. First of all, we want to put in place a foreign buyers tax to discourage that foreign investment into our housing market. That's a 20% foreign buyers tax. We also want to return the capital gains back to the levels they were not too long ago in the 2000s. And in doing that, it would discourage the flipping and discourage kind of the existing incentive right now that encourages people to use the housing market for property flipping to make a big profit. So we would discourage it that way. And then to incentivize builders, one of the tools that we've seen has been effective, or an idea that's been put out, and we've put it into our platform, is to waive the GST on projects which are affordable, meeting strict affordability guidelines. We would waive that, which would allow for a private developer to to be incentivized to go down a path where they build they build affordable projects, and that's another strategy we want to take, another policy that we think will work, and we're confident we can solve this problem. We're confident we can fix the housing crisis. It's just going to take a commitment and strong action, and that's what we have.
That didn't quite answer my question, but I will move on. You talk a lot about how Canadians have a choice in this election, but yesterday in your rally, for what I think is the first time, you specifically mentioned strategic voting and encouraged people not to listen to the strategic voting argument. Given the fact that the Conservatives and the Liberals appear to be in a bit of a deadlock at the top, how concerned are you about strategic voting being a factor in the last 10 days of this election?
Well, I know that's something that you're going to hear from the Liberals, and it's not a surprise. They do it every single election. And I want to say to people, instead of trying to figure out a whole bunch of different math, do I vote here, do I vote there, do I do this, do I do that? If you want certain things, you've got to vote for them. And if you want universal pharmacare, for example, New Democrats will deliver on that. More New Democrats will get that done. More Liberals won't make that happen, because we've seen when Liberals were in majority, they didn't get it done. And when Liberals were in government, they didn't do it. They campaigned on this in 2019, made it a hallmark promise, put it in their throne speech, and now there's $0 in their costed platform dedicated to pharmacare. So they've abandoned that promise in 2 years. So if you wanted pharmacare, certainly not Liberals that are going to do it. If you want to tackle the climate crisis, the Liberals have shown their failure on that front. They're not going to be the ones that do that. If you want to tackle the housing crisis, it's gotten worse under Mr. Trudeau. He's had 6 years. Why would we give him another 4 years? And for him to continue to fail on something that people desperately need a solution to. So we're saying to Canadians, if you want these things, if you want to tackle the housing crisis, if you want to tackle the climate crisis, if you want to invest in our healthcare system, if you want these things, vote New Democrat to deliver these things.
Next question, Karina Roman from CBC News.
You've been asked now multiple times why people should trust you to get those things done, and your answer is often why they shouldn't trust the Liberals or the Conservatives. But when you've given so little detail, or what detail we're going to get is going to come so late in the campaign, you've never formed national government yet. So why should Canadians trust you to get those things done when you've given them so little detail to figure out how you would get those things done without talking about why they shouldn't trust the other parties?
We have given a lot of detail. We've been really clear. We've laid out a path to achieving universal pharmacare, a really clear path. The costing for it, costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, how much it would save us, how much it would cost to do, and how every other country in the world that has healthcare has done it. We've laid that out. We've also laid out one of the key problems that both the Liberals and Conservatives are unwilling to talk about. One of the key problems in every area, whether we talk about the climate, the biggest polluters are exempted. Whether we talk about the rigged economy, the billionaires don't pay their fair share. When we look at the problems that we're up against, it's taking on the powerful. The Liberals and Conservatives have failed to do that. When it comes to bringing in universal pharmacare, the biggest opponents of that are the big pharmaceutical companies. Voting against pharmacare, as Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole did, didn't benefit Canadians, didn't benefit anyone behind me, didn't benefit any families in this community. It benefited the wealthiest at the very top. And the reason why I put this out there, that is the difference between our approach. At the end of the day, the major problems that Canadians are faced with are because we've got a system that has allowed the billionaires to profit off it, to exploit it, and Liberals and Conservatives have allowed that to happen. And the solutions are going to come when we take that on. And we are the only party that's willing to do that. And we've got a clear plan of how we'll tax the billionaires, how we'll make sure companies like Amazon pay their fair share, and how we can invest that in the solutions, the housing crisis, in the environmental crisis, and how we can invest that into our healthcare system. So we've laid out a really clear path. And the Liberals and Conservatives have not. They're not going to take on the actual problems that people are faced with. They're not going to take on the rigged economy. They're not going to provide any source of revenue. And if they don't, I also want people to know this, their plan is going to be they're going to cut help to people, or they're going to put the burden back on you. And we don't need to extrapolate this. Mr. Trudeau has already begun. He has cut the CRE by $800 a month, signaling his goal is going to be to cut help to people. Our plan is to make sure the billionaires pay their fair share. It's a clear choice for Canadians.
But can you understand why not releasing your entire costed platform until late on a Saturday second last Saturday before the election doesn't scream these are numbers to be proud of. I mean, do you understand why that's sown doubt in people's minds about what you're offering?
Not at all. We've laid out a really clear path for people. We've said for months and months and months that we would tax the billionaires, and that we were the only party with a credible plan to increase revenue and to tackle debt and deficit that doesn't include cutting help to people or putting the burden back on them. We're the only party that can say straight up that we are not going to do either of those two things, because we are going to look for new revenue, and not just a small amount of new revenue. We're going to look at significant ways to increase revenue that's going to really help people out. We're the only party that's laid that out time and time again. We've laid out our plans around what we want to do in 2019. A lot of those same things are a crisis now because Mr. Trudeau didn't do them. That's why we're running on them again, because pharmacare is still crucial and Mr. Trudeau didn't do it. People still need their teeth looked after. That's why dental care is still important. And the ultra rich still aren't paying their fair share. And people are seeing billionaires go to space while they struggle with one of the worst economic crises in their life. They're saying clearly something's wrong with that. And neither Mr. Trudeau or Mr. O'Toole want to fix it, and we are committed to fixing that.
Next question, Brenna Owen from Canadian Press.
Hi there. Yeah, my colleagues in Ottawa are wondering, though, why wait until 9 days before the election on a Saturday to release the full costed platform?
Well, we worked with the Parliamentary Budget Office, and that takes time, and we're proud that we're able to put this out to Canadians. But a lot of our plans, not a surprise. We've done a really thorough plan on what pharmacare would look like. We laid out our plan, how much it would cost. It would cost $10 billion, and how it would save provinces and territories money, how it would save families and businesses money, and how it would just make a lot of sense. So a lot of these plans we've laid out before. We've talked about how we could tax the billionaires and make sure they pay their fair share. We've laid that out before, and we wanted to lay it out again in more detail. But it's not a surprise to Canadians. We've said this before. Our dental care plan, we laid that out in great detail and said the costing of it, $1.5 billion, very achievable. And for that program, every single person, every single family that earns less than $60,000 would be immediately covered, and that doesn't have coverage now. That's a real plan to save a lot of people money and to help a lot of people who don't have access to dental care. And we've laid out our plan to tackle the housing crisis with real detail, that we would put in a foreign buyers tax, that we would discourage the property flipping that's going on. So we've laid out our plans, and people have known where we stood on these things for a long time. And we're happy that we're now able to put out some more details on our costing as well.
Yeah, just so about the housing crisis. So you've mentioned the foreign buyers tax, discouraging home flipping, building more affordable homes. But there's a lot of other pressures that are, making it more difficult for people to buy a home, and they might be feeling cynical about it. So what would you say to people who would like to see how your plan could go even further to address the housing affordability crisis?
I get the frustration and the cynicism, particularly when there's been 6 years of a prime minister who's been talking about this crisis, and then instead of it getting better, it got worse. Like, I can get why people hearing that are pretty frustrated and pretty angry and saying, well, this prime minister talked about it and announced all these housing plans, but it only got worse. Like, it's only harder and harder for me to find a place that I can rent, or it's even more impossible to find a place to buy. And so I get why people are frustrated. I want you to know I hear you on that, and I feel you on that, and we've got a plan to fix that. We cannot trust Mr. Trudeau with another 4 years if he's failed us like this. We've got a plan to fix it. We know that other countries have done it, and it just takes having the courage to take on the big money in our housing market and a real commitment to invest in building more homes that are affordable. Sometimes these things seem complicated, and sometimes the solutions are simple. At the end of the day, it really takes the will to get it done, and we've got the will to make this happen.
Next question, Richard Sussman from Global News.
This neighborhood is one of many neighborhoods in this city, in this country, where 20 years ago, young families could afford a home. 10 years ago, it became nearly impossible. Now it's impossible without stretching yourself to the max and getting lots of help. But if housing measures come in, there's concern that it will drive down the prices of these homes and leave people with unattainable mortgages and underwater. How much do you want to see the average price of a home in Vancouver go down based on your plan?
A very real concern that people have raised, and I want to speak to this. We don't want in any way to crash the housing market, but we certainly want to flatten it, because right now it's going out of control. And so our measures are to flatten it. And the reason why this is so important is because I've spoken with lots of people, but particularly with people in my riding in Burnaby, there are some beautiful homes and some beautiful communities, and I've spoken with people, and consistently, home after home, I go to these beautiful homes and they tell me what's their biggest concern, and they say housing. I kind of look around, I'm a bit confused because they got a beautiful home, and they see me looking around at their home and say, no, it's not for us. We got this home, we're okay. But our kids are never going to be able to afford this. In fact, we couldn't afford this home if we had to buy it today. Like, we couldn't afford the home that we live in right now. If it was on the market, we couldn't buy this home. That to us is a problem. And I say to you, I get that. I feel that. Like, parents are saying, what's the point of housing prices continue to skyrocket if their kids will never, ever be able to own a home? They don't think that's a good idea. I agree with them. And so that's why we want to flatten this. We want to make it so that people can actually afford a home, that it's not going out of control, that the houses don't keep on rising astronomically. That's what we're laying out.
Back to Jody Wilson-Raybould. We have this book coming out now, a few days before people go to vote. This was a major issue in the last election. It's now back in this election. Do you think this is just political score settling that's going on here? Like, what should people take out of these new allegations that will come forward in more detail when the book is released this week?
I think it's a story of a powerful woman who is using her platform to share what happened, to share her truth, to share the truth. And I think it's an important story for folks to know about. And I think it's a powerful and a difficult thing to do. To speak your truth and to be able to share it, it's not easy. And so I want to acknowledge the courage it takes. And I want to acknowledge that Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould has a lot of power in being able to share that story and took a lot of courage to do that. And I want to commend her for that.
En français, s'il te plaît.
C'est tellement difficile de partager une histoire, mais cette histoire de Madame Jody Wilson-Raybould, c'est une histoire d'une femme puissante qui va partager son vérité. Et c'est important de faire ça. Je veux saluer le courage de partager son histoire et je veux reconnaître comment c'est difficile et comment c'est important pour les femmes et pour les gens en général.
Could you repeat your announcement in Punjabi, please?
Yes, I could. Flexing on my 3 languages here. Hold on a second. ਅੱਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੋ ਲੋਕ ਖਰੀਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ। ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀ ਬੱਚੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣ ਜੋਗੀ ਹੋਵਾਂਗੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਾਊਸਿੰਗ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਸਿਸ ਦਾ ਸਾਹਮਣਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਬਿਲੀਅਨਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਕੰਪਨੀਜ਼ ਹਾਊਸਿੰਗ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਕਿਸਮ ਦਾ ਜੂਆ ਖੇਡ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਹਾਊਸਿੰਗ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਸ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵਧਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਾਹਮਣਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਹਲਕੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡਵਿਲ 'ਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਹਲਕੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦਾ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਉਹ 42 ਵਾਰੀ ਘਰ ਫਲਿੱਪ ਕਰਦਾ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਉਮੀਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਉਮੀਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਜਾਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਉਮੀਦਵਾਰ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਮੱਸਿਆ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਹੱਲ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਤੇ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਦਾ ਉਮੀਦਵਾਰ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਪੈਕੂਲੇਟਰਸ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਾਖੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਡਿਫੈਂਡ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਚਹਿਰੀਆਂ 'ਚ ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਹਰੇਕ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਹਰੇਕ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣ ਜੋਗੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਟੈਕਸ ਲਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਕੰਪਨੀਜ਼ ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਇਨਵੈਸਟਰਸ ਉਹ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਪੀਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਤੇ ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਘਰ ਬਣਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਖਰੀਦ ਸਕਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਸਿਸ ਦਾ ਸਾਹਮਣਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਹਰੇਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣ ਜੋਗੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਤੇ ਪਲਾਨ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਸ਼ਿਸ਼ੇ ਜੱਚੇ
This concludes our press conference. Thank you, merci.
Thank you, merci.